Imagine a world where the air itself felt dangerous, where stepping outside might mean never stepping back in, where diseases, smallpox, measles, plague, swept through towns like a storm, leaving devastation in their wake. Now, picture this. No antibiotics, no hospitals as we know them, and certainly no vaccines. What hope did people have? For most of human history, survival against disease was a gamble. Sometimes you lived, sometimes you didn't, and nobody truly understood why. But human beings are clever, and, if we're honest, a little desperate when survival is on the line. Which brings us to one of the strangest, bravest, and occasionally downright absurd stories in science: the history of vaccination.
Wanna learn without the stress? Welcome to
Long before syringes and sterile gloves, people around the world were experimenting with ways to fight disease. Some worked better than others. Some, well, let's just say they're not recommended for modern use. Take ancient China around the 10th century. Smallpox was terrorizing communities, killing many and scarring survivors for life. The Chinese had an idea. If you could expose someone to a weaker version of the disease, maybe they'd be protected from the real thing. And so, they tried what's called variolation. It worked like this. You'd take dried scabs from someone infected with smallpox. Yes, actual scabs. Grind them up and blow the powder into a healthy person's nose. Ah yes, the early version of a nasal spray. Sometimes it actually worked. The person would get a mild case of smallpox and survive, afterwards immune to future outbreaks. Other times, well, sometimes it didn't go so well. But compared to full-blown smallpox, this risky gamble was considered worth it. Meanwhile, in the Middle East and parts of Africa, similar practices were unfolding. In the 16th century, the Great Ottoman Empire had its own form of variolation, sometimes inserting infected matter into small cuts in the skin. Painful? Yes. Dangerous? Absolutely. But again, it was better than nothing. And here's the fascinating part. Knowledge traveled. Traders, explorers, even curious aristocrats carried these strange medical rumors across continents. One Englishwoman, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, encountered Ottoman variolation in the early 1700s and was so impressed, she had her own children inoculated. Imagine the gossip at English tea parties when she casually announced, "Oh yes, I had my children scratched with infected pus. They're doing splendidly." It's tempting to laugh at these early methods. Sniffing powdered scabs isn't exactly appealing. But remember, these were acts of courage. Humanity was, quite literally, experimenting with survival. Without fully understanding germs, without microscopes, without vaccines, they still stumbled towards something remarkable: the idea that a controlled dose of disease could prevent disaster. And this bold, risky, half-understood idea would set the stage for one of the most important medical revolutions in history. But to get there, we need to meet a country doctor, some milkmaids, and a cow named Blossom. And no, I'm not making that up. Now let's fast forward to the 18th century, in England. Picture rolling green hills, country doctors making house calls on horseback, and milkmaids. Yes, actual milkmaids. Here's the thing. Milkmaids were known for two things. One, churning out fresh dairy for the village. And two, their famously clear, unscarred faces. Now, in a time when smallpox left people scarred for life, if they survived at all, having smooth, unblemished skin was like walking around with a neon sign saying, "I've never had smallpox." So naturally, people started asking, why do milkmaids never get smallpox? The answer was both strange and brilliant. Milkmaids often caught cowpox, a mild infection from cows that gave them blisters on their hands. Not deadly, just annoying. And once they had cowpox, they seemed to be immune to smallpox. It's almost like the cow was giving them a secret vaccine. Enter Edward Jenner, a country doctor with sharp observation skills, and possibly the world's most underrated hype man for cows. In 1796, Jenner decided to test this milkmaid rumor. And when I say test, I mean he really went for it. He took fluid from a cowpox blister on a milkmaid's hand and deliberately inserted it into a cut on an 8-year-old boy's arm. Yes, an 8-year-old boy. Now, before you panic, this wasn't some random child he grabbed from the street. The boy, James Phipps, was actually the son of Jenner's gardener. So, still ethically questionable, but at least there was some family connection. Anyway, James got cowpox. He recovered just fine. Then, weeks later, Jenner did something wild. He exposed James to actual smallpox. And guess what? James didn't get sick. Boom. The world's first scientific vaccination experiment. Jenner called his discovery vaccination, from vacca, the Latin word for cow. Yes, the entire field of vaccines owes its name to a cow. Blossom the cow, in fact. The very animal that supplied Jenner's crucial cowpox material. Blossom became so famous, her hide now hangs on display in a British medical museum. Imagine explaining that legacy to a cow. Good news, Blossom. You're going down in history. Bad news. Well, let's just say it's a one-way trip to the museum wall. Now, was everyone immediately thrilled about Jenner's discovery? Of course not. Humans rarely are. Some people thought vaccination was unnatural. Others made wild claims, like that if you got cowpox vaccine, you might actually start turning into a cow. Yes, 18th century conspiracy theories were alive and well. Picture posters showing humans sprouting hooves and horns after vaccination. Honestly, sounds like the first meme campaign in medical history. Still, Jenner's discovery spread fast. By the early 1800s, governments were taking notice. Armies wanted their soldiers vaccinated. Communities wanted protection from outbreaks. And doctors around the world were copying Jenner's method. But with popularity came resistance. Enter the anti-vaccination movement. Yes, you heard that right. The very first anti-vax campaigns kicked off in the early 19th century. Some people argued it was unnatural. Others claimed it was unsafe. And then there were the conspiracy theories. One particularly colorful fear was that vaccinated people might start sprouting cow-like features. Horns, tails, mooing at sunset, the whole barnyard package. Imagine a public health flyer. Get vaccinated. Side effects may include immunity and possibly turning into a cow. By the mid-1800s, Britain even made smallpox vaccination mandatory. And let me tell you, nothing fuels resistance like the word mandatory. In fact, the Anti-Vaccination League formed in the 1860s, organizing rallies, writing pamphlets, and, my personal favorite, producing cartoons of children literally transforming into cows after getting vaccinated. Cartoons, the 19th century version of Twitter memes. It's oddly comforting, isn't it? 200 years ago, people were already arguing about vaccines in ways that feel very familiar today. But here's the twist. Despite the pushback, vaccination worked. Really well. Communities that vaccinated saw smallpox cases plummet. Countries that adopted it more widely saved countless lives. And slowly, grudgingly, people began to realize this wasn't some weird cow-based fad. This was the real deal. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, vaccination was spreading in surprising ways. In Spain, doctors carried cowpox scabs across the ocean to their colonies in the Americas. And because refrigeration didn't exist yet, they used children. Yes, seriously. A rotating chain of orphan boys were deliberately infected with cowpox one after another, so the live vaccine could be passed along the entire voyage. It was called the Balmas Expedition of 1803, and it's both one of the most ambitious public health missions in history and one of the strangest. Imagine pitching that plan today. We'll just bring a dozen kids and keep passing the virus down the line like a relay baton. Somehow it worked, and vaccination spread around the globe. But here's the fascinating thing. This wasn't just about science. It was also about culture, politics, and trust. Because vaccination wasn't just a medical procedure, it was a social experiment. Would people trust their governments, their doctors, the cows, and that messy, complicated relationship between vaccines and society? Oh, it was just getting started. By the late 1800s, other brilliant minds, like Louis Pasteur, began to expand the vaccine idea beyond smallpox. Rabies, anthrax, cholera. The list started to grow. Vaccination wasn't just about one disease anymore. It was about reimagining how humans could fight back against some of nature's deadliest enemies. But smallpox remained the crown jewel, the first disease humanity actually dared to dream of eradicating entirely. And spoiler alert, we did it. But that part of the story comes a little later. So by the mid-1800s, vaccination has gone global. Jenner's cow experiment is now a worldwide phenomenon. Smallpox cases are dropping, and humanity is feeling pretty smug. But here's the catch. Smallpox wasn't the only killer on the block. Enter rabies, a terrifying disease that turned dog bites into death sentences. No cure, no mercy. If you got rabies, that was basically it. And this is where a French chemist/superhero named Louis Pasteur steps in. Now, you've probably heard Pasteur's name before. He's the guy behind pasteurization, the reason your milk doesn't come with a side of dysentery. But Pasteur was more than just a milk guy. He was obsessed with microbes, those invisible little critters no one could see, but which were secretly ruining everyone's lives. And in the 1880s, Pasteur had a bold idea. What if vaccines could work for more than just smallpox? He started experimenting with anthrax, the disease that wiped out livestock. Pasteur discovered that by weakening the anthrax bacteria, basically training wheels for germs, he could vaccinate animals and protect them. To prove it, he staged a very public experiment in 1881. He vaccinated half a group of sheep and left the others unprotected. Then he exposed them all to anthrax. Guess which sheep lived? Yep, the vaccinated ones. The others? Not so lucky. Pasteur basically pulled off the greatest "I told you so" in medical history. But anthrax was just the warm-up act. The real spotlight moment came with rabies. Rabies terrified people, and for good reason. Once symptoms appeared, death was almost guaranteed. Imagine the panic every time a stray dog wandered into town. Pasteur developed a rabies vaccine by weakening the virus through a painstaking process involving, wait for it, drying out infected rabbit spinal cords. Yeah, not exactly lab-safe by today's standards. But hey, science in the 1880s was basically the Wild West. In 1885, Pasteur's vaccine faced its first big human test. A 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister who had been bitten multiple times by a rabid dog. Doctors begged Pasteur to try the experimental vaccine. High stakes, no pressure, just the possibility of saving a child's life from a guaranteed death sentence. Pasteur gave the boy a series of injections. Days passed, weeks, and miraculously, Joseph survived. Boom. Vaccination wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a global headline. Pasteur became a scientific rock star. Joseph Meister? He grew up, became a hospital caretaker, and lived a full life, thanks to rabbit spinal cords and one very gutsy French chemist. Pasteur's success opened the floodgates. Suddenly, vaccines weren't just a quirky cowpox trick. They were a new frontier of medicine. Scientists raced to tackle other deadly diseases: cholera, plague, typhoid, diphtheria. And each discovery came with its own mix of wonder, skepticism, and the occasional, "You did what in the lab?" moment. Because remember, this was an era when sterile technique often meant wiping your hands on your pants before surgery. So yeah, messy, but progress was happening. By the end of the 19th century, vaccination had transformed from Jenner's backyard experiment into a global medical revolution. People still argued, of course, about safety, about religion, about government mandates. But for every protester, there were more lives saved. And slowly, the idea took root. Disease didn't always have to win. Humanity could fight back. By the time the 20th century rolled around, vaccination had gone mainstream. We had vaccines for smallpox, rabies, anthrax, diphtheria, and more. Scientists were cranking out new ones like they were dropping the hottest mixtapes of the century. But one disease still stood tall as the ultimate villain: smallpox. Now, smallpox wasn't just deadly. It was brutal. We're talking fevers, pustules, scarring, blindness, and death rates up to 30%. And unlike some diseases, smallpox didn't just hang out in one region. It was global, everywhere. So humanity decided, enough was enough. In the 1950s, the World Health Organization launched a bold plan: global smallpox eradication. Not control, not reduce, but wipe it off the face of the earth. Sounds ambitious, right? I mean, humans can't even agree on pizza toppings. But here we were trying to organize the entire planet to beat one virus. The strategy? Mass vaccination campaigns. Doctors and health workers went door to door, village to village, often carrying vaccines in little freeze-dried vials because electricity and refrigerators weren't always an option. They invented a brilliant little tool called the bifurcated needle, a tiny fork-shaped needle that made smallpox vaccination faster, cheaper, and easier. Seriously, it was like the USB stick of global health. But here's where it gets wild. The campaign wasn't just about science. It was about human grit. Health workers traveled through war zones. They hiked mountains. They crossed deserts. They literally bribed people with food or gifts to get vaccinated. One famous case: in India, health workers went house to house, marking doors with chalk to track who had been vaccinated. It was like a giant, global game of tag, but with higher stakes. And it worked. Slowly but surely, smallpox began to vanish. By the late 1970s, there was only one case left. A man named Ali Malmalan in Somalia, 1977. He survived and became the last person on Earth to ever have smallpox. Think about that. Humanity had been battling this monster for over 3,000 years. And now it was gone. Officially, in 1980, the World Health Organization declared smallpox eradicated. And here's the mic drop moment. Smallpox is the only human disease we have completely eradicated. The only one that's not just a win. That's like beating the final boss in a video game, on hard mode, with only one life left. Of course, the victory didn't mean vaccines were done. Far from it. In the same century, vaccines expanded to fight polio, measles, mumps, rubella, tetanus, whooping cough, and more. Suddenly, childhood survival rates skyrocketed. Diseases that once wiped out millions became manageable or nearly eliminated. And yes, new resistance movements popped up here and there. People questioned safety, worried about side effects, spread rumors. Sound familiar? But the overall result? Vaccines became one of the most powerful tools in human history, right up there with fire, the wheel, and maybe pizza delivery. So humanity slayed smallpox. Drop the mic, roll credits, right? Not so fast. Because even though smallpox was out of the picture, other diseases were still hanging around like uninvited party guests. Measles, polio, tetanus, and let's not forget influenza, the flu, which basically reinvented itself every year like it was auditioning for a reality TV show. First up, polio. Now, polio was a nightmare of the 20th century. It mostly targeted children, sometimes leaving them paralyzed for life. Iron lungs, those giant metal machines that helped polio patients breathe, became haunting symbols of the epidemic. Enter Jonas Salk in 1955 with the first effective polio vaccine. Here's the best part. When asked about patenting it, Salk famously said, "Could you patent the sun?" Translation: vaccines belong to humanity, not to corporations. Boom. Instant legend. A few years later, Albert Sabin introduced the oral polio vaccine, drops on a sugar cube. Suddenly, protecting kids from polio was as easy as eating candy. That's a win-win if I've ever heard one. Thanks to these efforts, polio is now almost eradicated worldwide. Just a few stubborn pockets remain, and health workers are chasing it down with the same energy as someone trying to swat the last mosquito in the room. Then came other vaccines: measles, mumps, rubella, hepatitis, HPV. By the late 20th century, kids were getting whole schedules of vaccines, and childhood survival rates skyrocketed. Diseases that used to be normal, like whooping cough or measles, became rare. It's like humanity discovered a cheat code. So where do we go from here? Scientists are already working on next-gen vaccines for malaria, HIV, tuberculosis, and even cancer. Some are experimenting with universal flu vaccines that could take down every flu strain in one shot. Others dream of needle-free vaccines, nasal sprays, skin patches, maybe even edible ones. Imagine protecting yourself from disease just by eating a cookie. That's the kind of future I can get behind. And here's the real takeaway. Vaccines aren't just about medicine. They're about possibility. They're about humanity learning, adapting, and daring to believe that disease doesn't always get the final word. We've come a long way from blowing powdered scabs up someone's nose. So the next time you roll up your sleeve for a shot, take a second to appreciate the journey. From cows, to milkmaids, to Pasteur, to Salk, to mRNA, vaccination is one of the greatest sagas in human history. And it's still being written.
It's smart, it's fun, it's cartoon,